Take it. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76 Entertainment and Media. I see one person in here. I don't expect a large crowd. Charles, thank you for coming through for just a little bit or however long you're here. This is my first live stream on this channel. This is my smallest channel. And I haven't uploaded any content here recently, but I wanted to water it and show it some love. And, shooting pre-recorded videos takes time. And me and my brother, Amal Dunbar, we've gone over that ad nauseum at times, the amount of time it takes to, shoot something, edit it, add the pictures in, all kinds of things. So the cool thing about StreamYard is that it allows a great deal of agility. And so you can do a broadcast and, while you're not making the Oscar winning film every time you do a broadcast, it does go straight to wherever you send the video. So there'll be more of these here. I started this channel as a bit of an experiment, and I set it up to have a broad focus. Thus far, I've reviewed some movies, some TV shows, some books, so while I haven't watered this one enough, there's been, just some time spent seeing what would stick and what would work and what would gain traction. So for this one, I'm going forward, I want to mimic one of my favorite content creators, the Critical Drinker, or should I say, follow in his footsteps a little bit, and start using this space to look back at older works and classic works, especially now since we can't go to the movies and we can't go out and see the new stuff. I was fortunate to recently go see Tenet by Christopher Nolan and John David Washington and Robert Pattinson, but I think there's value in re-examining some of the older stuff, whether it be movies or cartoons or, older series or books or whatever. Me and my brother, I think we kind of had a discussion about that one time over The Dark Knight Returns. And, one of the questions is, when you have a movie or a book or a TV series that's 10 years old, 20 years old, or 30 years old, what new is contributed by you looking at it and giving your own personal spin on it, because it's not new. Well, I thought about that. That's a very good question. Why look back at something like The Dark Knight Returns or The Watchmen or Kingdom Come, DC's Kingdom Come, or The Crisis on Infinite Earths, Or in the case of the critical drinker, why spend 3 to 4 hours talking about each of the original Star Trek movies with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelly? Why spend hours doing retrospectives of those series? I mean, because they've been out for 30 years at this point. Well, in my mind, when I thought about it, those series, in this instance, well, let's take the Star Trek series, for example. We have an emotional attachment to those series. I know I do. I watched I had the VHS of Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, and I have the DVD here. I have the VHS of Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. And I watched those movies as a kid over and over and over again, to the point where I knew a lot of the lines. I knew, when the Enterprise was going to fire a torpedo. I knew, what Christopher Lloyd was going to say, when he was commanding that Klingon bird of prey. Hell, I even started speaking some Klingon after watching that enough. And so I think that there's value in going back and talking about some of these older works. And what I realized is, the way I see YouTube, I see each channel as a store. It's your own storefront. And, while it's cool to shoot the most novel and unique video, your content matters, your presentation matters, but also the viewer's connection with you matters as well. So people sometimes they start to watch because they like you, they like your jokes, they like what you have to say. That's one of the reasons why I like the Critical Drinkers, because he's got a snarky style of humor just like I do. So I think that there's value in going back and looking at and talking about older works, especially if you're a writer or some sort of a content creator, whether you're not shooting your own videos or if you're working on a book project yourself. It's important to show, for the sake of connecting with others, that you have knowledge of those classic works. Charles says Transformers, the movie, is a classic. Absolutely. And I'm going to get into that. Recently, I told my brother, Amal, he keeps coming up quite a bit. I kind of consider him to be the cook in the kitchen a little bit, because he's taught me a lot about shooting video and creating media. I recently told him that I wanted to create some quote unquote fanboy content, and to kind of build the channel out in that direction to see what happens when I do that. So I actually looked it up before starting this broadcast, and there is a definition online of what a fanboy is. So according to Google, a fanboy, you know what? I'll just do the screen share. Shout out to the scientist supreme, Nicole Ali. She taught me how to do this. I'm still learning StreamYard. Fanboy. A fanboy is a male fan, especially one who is obsessive about comic books, music, movies, or science fiction. See, I didn't even know that you could throw music in there. But a male fan, especially. I had my Bluetooth speaker going just now. And let me turn this down. Okay. Charles, this channel's not very big, but I'm gonna make you a mod. Boom. So I didn't know that a fanboy included music as well, but it turns out that it does. So I very much, while people know me as Dr. Dunbar, and at my job, we all, we wear certain personas and masks at our jobs and throughout society. But I'm very much a fanboy. I grew up on Star Wars. I grew up on Star Trek. I watched G.I. Joe. I watched the Transformers. I watched Thundercats and all of those things when I was growing up. And right around middle school, probably before middle school, in the 80s, we were into comic books. I collected more DC comic books. My brother collected more Marvel comic books. Our best friend was a Marvel guy. Shout out to the G-Dog out in AZ. He was more of a Captain America guy. And yeah, we had the toys, the Transformers, the GI Joes. I don't know if I had any Thundercats, but I know that I had the Transformers and GI Joes and some He-Man figures, and before that, Star Wars. I had a an X-wing fighter and a couple of the Luke Skywalker figurines and action figures, and I had a Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I had my share of the Transformers, and I had an Optimus Prime. Shout out to the Lewis brothers for Amir and the Lewis brothers for breaking the arm off my Optimus Prime toy. Um, that was another family. The Lewis brothers, their mom was my mother's best friend, and we did a sleepover, and they slept over our spot, and I had my Optimus Prime. It was one of my favorite toys, and they were a mischievous group. And I remember I left the room. It was a Friday night, and I came back, and they were fighting over my Optimus Prime, and they broke the arm off my Optimus Prime. So shout out to the Lewis boys and their older brother, Amir Willis, for that lasting impression. So I want to build out more fan base, more fanboy content, and maybe start to build a channel out that way. And so for this live stream, I'm going to take a look back at the 1986 Transformers movie, one of the most important movies of my childhood. And I'll describe why. My style and approach. I'm a scientist and a writer. I think about movies and cartoons and comic books all the time myself. You wouldn't think that to look at me, but you wouldn't think a lot of things to look at me. I'm working on a creative fiction piece right now, and I also wrote up the first draft of a science fiction novel, which is sitting in a box in my guest bedroom right now. So at some point, I hope to pick that back up and tinker with it. And I've taken classes on writing fiction and short stories, and thus my analysis will involve some storytelling, some plot, character lines, and the time in which the story was created and what it means today. Charles, by the time I get through all this talking, if you're still hanging on, I'll drop the link and bring you in so you can give your 2 cents. But I'm gonna talk my way through this as best I can and show some pictures here in the meantime. So bear with me. And if you got to go, I understand. The rest of this will be available on the playback, which is a major advantage of StreamYard. So I'm gonna read this just briefly. I looked up. I thought it was appropriate to kind of give a history of the Transformers and where it came from. So I'm going to read this just briefly because I think this properly sets up the era and the time and when this movie was released. Excuse me. Then this is on Wikipedia. The Transformers is an American animated robot superhero television series, which originally aired from September 17th, 1984 to November 11th, 1987. I'm not going to read that. I'm going to skip down to the background. The Transformers toy line and animated series were inspired by the Japanese toy line Microman, an Eastern descendant of the 12-inch GI Joe action figure series by Takara. In 1988, the Microman spinoff Diaclone was released, featuring inch-tall humanoid figures able to sit in the driver's seat of scale and model vehicles, which could transform into humanoid robot bodies the drivers piloted. Sounds kind of like Voltron. Later still, in 1983, a Microman subline Micro Change was introduced, featuring actual size items that transformed into robots, such as micro cassettes. Okay, we're talking about Soundwave here. Guns and toy cars. Diaclone and Micro Change toys were subsequently discovered at the 1983 Tokyo Toy Fair by Hasbro toy company product developer Henry Orenstein, who presented the concept to Hasbro's head of R&D, George Dunsey. Enthusiastic about the product, it was decided to release toys from both Diaclone and Micro Change as one toy line for their markets although there were eventual changes to the color schemes in the original toys to match the new series. By 1984, U.S. regulators had removed many of the restrictions regarding the placement of. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to give you guys a visual while I read this. Let me bring Hot Rod back. Yeah. Okay. By the way, Charles has a Sergeant Charles Faulkner. He has one of these for the Thundercats on his channels. Panthro, actually. By 1984, U.S. regulators had removed many of the restrictions regarding the placement of promotional content within children's television programming. The way was cleared for the new product-based television program. Hasbro previously worked with Marvel Comics to develop G.I. Joe, a real American hero, for a three-pronged marketing scheme: the toy line, a tie-in comic book by Marvel, and an animated miniseries co-produced by Marvel's media arm, Marvel Productions, and Griffin Backel advertising agency show Sunbow Productions production house. So if you watch the Transformers and G.I. Joe in the 80s, and I always watched the end credits and the music. I like the music. You'd see those graphics show up for this Marvel Productions and Griffin Backel advertising, I believe, and Sunbow Productions. Given the success of that strategy, the process was repeated in 1984 when Hasbro marketing vice president Bob Prupis approached Marvel to develop their new robot series, which Jay Bacall dubbed the Transformers. I think I'll stop this here. I just wanted to set the stage because this series started in the early 1980s, as they described in the United States in 1984. So that made me 8 years old. That made my brother 10 years old. And as with most of our cartoon media at that time, whether it was the Transformers, whether it was Robotech, whether it was what was the other one? The Transformers, Robotech, Voltron. All of that came from Asia, surprisingly. And if you looked at a lot of our toys at that time, when you turn the box over for many of our toys, it said made in Taiwan, made in China, made in Japan. So it's fascinating that all the stuff came from Southeastern Asia. Charles says I was 2. Okay. Yep. I got a few years on you, Charles. So let's take Hot Rod away here. And we're going to stop the screen share here. Once again, shout out to the Scientist Supreme for showing me how to do all these tricks in StreamYard. So that's the history of the Transformers. And so a good number, that stretch of my childhood was spent, we were latchkey kids. So a good time of our lives were spent coming home, having a snack, and then popping on the television to watch these TV shows after school. And so I can still remember the first episode of the Transformers. These are all on YouTube. If you dig them up, you could probably find these compilations on Amazon. You could find these things everywhere. But the Transformers, basically, in a nutshell, told the story of a series of a species is the better term, of sentient robotic beings from the planet Cybertron. And when they opened up the series, I remember the first episode, there was a civil war. How appropriate for the times. Oh, I hope YouTube doesn't take this down for even mentioning something like that. But it opened up with a civil war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, which are depicted or illustrated by these two logos right here. So you had two races in a civil war fighting for control over their home planet of Cybertron. And so in that first episode, I believe it was the Autobots who decided the Autobots were the quote unquote the good guys, which are represented by that face right there, which is red, white, and blue. I don't know if that has any. I don't know if that had any patriotic underpinnings to it. And the Decepticons were the bad guys, represented by the face or the symbol over on your left. That's purple and blue. And so those were your two teams. And so I believe in that first episode, the Autobots were they set out from Cybertron in search of energy, because both species ran off of energon cubes. If you watch the series, you see their energy and the energon cubes were a major point of contention throughout the series. And in that first episode, the Decepticons followed them, and there was a battle. I think the two ships joined up, and kind of like in the colonial age, where the ships would join and they fight, and one group would go over to another ship and fight the other group, and then they wound up crash landing on Earth. The Decepticon ship, Charles said, of course it does. So the Decepticon ship crash landed in the ocean, and the Autobot ship crash landed into the base of a volcano. And both races, this was in the prehistoric era on the planet Earth, and both races lay dormant for let's say thousands of years. So they transitioned from the era of the dinosaurs, I forget what that's called, the Paleolithic era, the prehistoric era, to the modern era, where humans had technology and had gone through the Industrial Revolution. So, and in the series, that volcano goes off, and that activates Teletran 1. I know this all from memory, by the way. It activates Teletran 1. Teletran 1 sends out its satellite, or its probe, to look at all the human technology, and it brings the information back, and then it starts to reassemble the Autobots in the form of our vehicles and gadgets. And then at some point, I forget how the Decepticons were activated, but the Decepticons were activated as well, and they were reformed and remade basically into the form of our vehicles and gadgets. Many of the Decepticons in early on they took the form of aircraft, and the Autobots, many of them, took the form of land-based vehicles, cars for the most part. Cars, trucks. Optimus Prime was a rig with a tractor trailer, and many of his army, they were all trucks, whether it was ambulances, vans, sedans, sports cars, police vehicles. Those were the Autobots. And so that was the television series. After school, that was a regular thing for 4 years, coming home, watching those characters, forming an emotional attachment to those characters, seeing those characters fight and go through their trials and tribulations. The Autobots friended some humans, Spike and Sparkplug with Wiki. That was their last name. I think they were Polish or something like that. And then they were always fighting over energy, and they were had these different subplots. And then, just like G.I. Joe, it's amazing how similar this series was to G.I. Joe. They gradually added on more characters, and the toy product line sold gradually expanded. So eventually, you started getting, on the Autobot side, I'm going to jump to the combiners, quote unquote. But actually, the first combiner was on the Decepticon side. It was Devastator. And I think maybe Voltron came out in parallel, which is maybe where Marvel Productions and Hasbro got the idea to start doing combiners of their own. But the first combiner in this little Transformer universe was Devastator, which was 6 construction Decepticons. You had a crane, a pickup truck, a mixer loader vehicle, a bulldozer. They all combined to form this combiner called Devastator. And then gradually they brought on On the Autobot side, the first combiner was Superion. Superion was comprised of 5 jets, 5 aircraft. And that was significant because the Autobots had never had aircraft at that point. And so parallel to the Autobots were the Stunticons. I'm getting giddy just talking about this. The Stunticons were the first Decepticon automobiles. And so they formed into Menasor. And I had the Stunticons, by the way. And so then you go forward. The next Autobot combiner was Defensor. He was comprised of 5 Protectobots. And his counterpart was Bruticus. And Bruticus was comprised of 5 Combaticons. And if you watch the cartoon, it was called Starscream's Brigade. I'm going to go back to Starscream in a minute. Starscream was always jockeying for battle, for control of the Decepticons with Megatron. And in this particular episode, Starscream got exiled to an island, and he found 5 old war vehicles, and he basically created his own little army called the Combaticons, and they formed a combiner called Bruticus. So I'm saying that to say that as this went on over the 4 years, they added on to these characters, and as you watched, and if you watched regularly, you formed an attachment to some of these characters. And one of the subplots within the Decepticon group was a constant battle for control between Starscream and Megatron. Megatron was a pistol, and Starscream was a jet. And Starscream was always looking to stab Megatron in the back to get control of the group. So Megatron actually had 2 lieutenants. There was Starscream and there was Soundwave. And Soundwave, in contrast to Starscream, Soundwave was very, very loyal to Megatron. So fast forward, so you're watching this for 4 years. And then in 1986, they started advertising the Transformers movie, which was probably at the peak of the franchise, and it made sense to bring the movie out at the peak of the franchise, which you had this following developed. And I think G.I. Joe did a TV movie with Serpentor and those kinds of things. But I'm going to keep this about the Transformers. So the movie came out in 1986, and I watched. Let me look just to make sure. Yeah, that was August 8th, 1986, and so that was probably around my birthday, because I'm an August 25th baby. My brother was born on August 3rd. And we did go watch the movie with my father. My father had a visitation at that time. And so we were with him when we watched the movie. I remember the 3 of us going to watch the Transformers movie out in New York State's capital region. It was the 3 of us. And that was a big deal because we had started seeing the trailer and seeing the advertisement on TV, and we got little bits and pieces through the trailer, and there were little hints as to what was going to happen in the movie in that trailer, which I'm going to in a meaningful way, but hopefully in a time efficient way, I'm going to lay out to you right now. So I'm going to, as a writer who's taken classes myself on storytelling and writing fiction and those kinds of things, I'm going to break it down into 3 acts, and I'm going to, give little tidbits as I go along in terms of what stood out to me and what really resonated with me throughout the movie. So the movie had a total runtime of 85 minutes. I sat and I watched it again here on Friday night. I have the DVD. I have the widescreen version and the full screen version. I watched the full screen version. And so the movie opens up in terms of the first act. We get our first look at the big bad guy in the movie. And the big bad guy of the movie is, waiting for StreamYard here, it's Unicron. Unicron is the monster planet, and they told us about that in the trailer. This is older, so this is, if you haven't seen it, you can go look it up. But there are going to be spoilers in this, as they say. So we see the big bad guy coming, emerging from some far out region of space, and Unicron attacks a planet. I think it's the planet Lithon, which has its own sentient race of humanoid robots. So we get to see Unicron tear up this planet, attack this planet, and digest it up. And we even, during that, we get to see some of Unicron's insides. So we get to see that Unicron itself is a robotic planet that is roaming the universe and searching out other planets for consumption. And then you get we're told that this impending danger is coming, and then they transfer throughout space, and then the rock music starts, and you hear the Transformers song by Lion that was performed by Lion, and you get this nice rock, hard rock track, and you get the introduction, you get the Transformers logo, and you get the cast of characters. And so this movie starred actors like, I'm going to read them off here. I could probably read them off the top of my head, but it starred actors like, the characters were voiced by Judd Nelson. And the characters were voiced by people like Robert Stack and Lionel Stander and Eric Idle and Leonard Nimoy. They have Mr. Spock in there. And Unicron was voiced by Orson Welles. So they did some nice recruiting and casting for the voices of the movie. So in the first act, we're introduced to the great evil, Unicron. Unicron is coming. Neither the Autobots or the Decepticons know that Unicron is coming. And the movie opens up with, I think the Decepticons have taken control of Cybertron, and Optimus Prime and the Autobots are residing on a moon of Cybertron. And it's decided that they need to make a run to Autobot City on Earth for more energy. So Optimus Prime dispatches Ironhide. Ironhide transformed into a red minivan, or a red van. I think it was a van. Ironhide gets dispatched to Earth with Prowl and Windcharger. And they, give me a second here. One second. Yeah, I think, yeah, this is an appropriate visual. They get dispatched to Earth for more Energon cubes. Laserbeak spies on the Autobots, listens to Optimus Prime and Ironhide's discussion. Goes back to Cybertron, tells Megatron, and Megatron says, "Okay, we're going to intercept these guys." And so they attack these guys on the way to Earth. And something happens during this battle that we had never seen in the cartoon series up to that point, which was some of the characters started dying. So the Decepticons invade their shuttle. Megatron transforms into the gun, the pistol, and they start gunning down the Autobots. And I mean, and again, in the cartoon, they're shooting each other, and then they knock each other down. Maybe they temporarily disable one another. But in this movie, the energy blasts are flying right through them. So as a kid, you're seeing, wow, these guys are getting killed right away. And these are characters that you kind of formed a bit of an attachment to over those many years coming home from school. And so these are characters that you kind of gotten to know, and they're dying. This is Prowler right here. His eyes kind of flash out, and the smoke starts coming from his mouth. And it was kind of jarring to see, and then at the end of that scene, Ironhide wasn't completely killed, and he's hanging on for life, and he's trying, Megatron's saying, okay, yeah, we got the shuttle now, so we're gonna go to Autobot City and we're gonna decimate these guys. And Ironhide, grabs onto Megatron's leg, and he kind of says, no, with the rest of his energy left. And Megatron says, hey, such heroic nonsense, and he blasts him. And so as a kid, again, this is kind of big because you didn't see these characters die before. So that was new. On Earth, we get introduced to the protagonist, the young hero of the group, of the movie. And it turns out to be, give me a second here. It turns out to be Hot Rod, who was voiced by Judd Nelson. And at that time, I was so young, I didn't know who Judd Nelson was. I mean, I knew he was an actor, but Judd Nelson starred in The Breakfast Club with Emilio Estevez and Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald. Judd Nelson was the badass kid with the trench coat and the I think his name was Bender, but he was the bad kid in The Breakfast Club. He also played in New Jack City with Mario Van Peebles, who played Scotty Appleton. So Judd Nelson was in that movie as well. But he voiced Hot Rod. And Hot Rod was the young protagonist. They introduced so many new characters in the movie. You didn't really know initially that he was going to be the protagonist and the character who might potentially save the day in the end. But we get introduced to him. He's fishing on Earth with Daniel Witwicky, who's Spike's kid. And then Daniel wants to see the shuttle land. And so they go take a look at Lookout Mountain. And that's where this particular gift comes from, because Hot Rod identifies that there's a hole in the shuttle and the Decepticons are on there. So he starts shooting at the shuttle, and the Decepticons fight back. And then that's when the battle for Autobot City starts. And we get introduced to characters like we get introduced to characters like Cup and RC and Springer and Ultra Magnus. And these characters are battling against all the bad guys that Megatron brought with him: Starscream, Soundwave, Blitzwing, the Insecticons, Astro Train. They start this huge battle for Autobot City ensues. There are a lot of classic lines. There's a scene where Blitzwing has Hot Rod square in his sights, and Cup comes out of nowhere and moves Blitzwing's cannon, and Hot Rod says to him, "Not bad for an old timer," and Cup says, "Well, old timer, that's something you'll never get to be if you don't make it to the city." And Hot Rod says, "Save it, Cup." So there's this kind of apprentice mentor thing between Cup and Hot Rod throughout the movie, which is kind of cool. We get introduced to Springer, who is a triple changer, just like Blitzwing and Astro Train. there's this momentous battle between the Decepticons and the Autobots for Autobot City. Another cool aspect of that is up to that point, the Decepticons were the only ones with a musical device. So Soundwave transformed into a audio cassette player, and at that time, they had recently introduced Blaster. So then the Autobots had a Blaster was a boombox. So I might have misspoken. The Decepticons had a musical device, which was Soundwave, and he could eject Rumble and Frenzy, Ravage and Laserbeak. And in this one, we were introduced, albeit briefly, to Ratbat. But in this particular scene, Ultra Magnus tells Blaster, send a message to Optimus Prime. We need help. We're losing. And Megatron says, Soundwave gen that transmission. And so Rumble, Renzi, Ravage, and Ratbat attack Blaster and Perceptor. And Blaster releases his cassettes. So we had never seen that before. So that was kind of cool. Another scene that stands out here is the Devastator scene. So there's a scene where all of the Decepticons gather at this juncture, and Megatron tells the Constructicons merge for the kill, and they form Devastator, and Devastator's pounding through the wall, and then in another an outlook overlooking this little area, Hot Rod, RC, and Springer, and Daniel and Cup, they all gather. And one of my favorite lines there was Springer says, I got better things to do tonight than die. There was another dialogue between RC and Hot Rod that I can't think of right now. But so he fires this missile, a couple missiles out at Devastator. Devastator rips a piece of the fortress off and throws it into the outlook. And so that's destroyed. They all have to run out of there, and then they show the battle going basically all night long. And then the fighting stops, and the Decepticons seem to have gained the advantage in terms of infiltrating Autobot City. And then they all look to the sky, and they see a shuttle coming, and it's Optimus Prime. He got the message, and he's en route with Wheeljack and Hound and the Dinobots. And Optimus Prime turns to the Dinobots, says, Dinobots destroy Devastators. They all jump out of the shuttle and they attack Devastator, and there's a quick little fight there. And then that sets the stage for this scene, which when I watch it to this day still gives me goosebumps. Optimus Prime looks out over the city and says, Megatron must be stopped, no matter the cost. So he transforms. You hear the touch by Stan Bush, and that sets up the final battle between Megatron and Optimus Prime, which ends up being a battle to the death. And that battle is Optimus Prime has him beat, but the battle is turned when Hot Rod interferes. And during that interference, Megatron is able to fatally wound Optimus Prime in the process of him getting fatally wounded himself. And so that kind of ends Act 1. The Decepticons retreat from Autobot City. The Autobots have suffered a number of casualties, the main one being Optimus Prime. So Optimus Prime lays on his deathbed, and during that time, he announces that Ultra Magnus, who's voiced by Robert Stack, is going to be the new leader of the Autobots. And then at that moment, where it's revealed that there's something called the Autobot Matrix of Leadership. And so Optimus Prime passes the Autobot Matrix of Leadership to Ultra Magnus and tells him, this was passed to me, and I'm passing it to you because in our darkest hour, Autobot is going to rise from our ranks to light our darkest hour. So Ultra Magnus is given the Autobot Matrix of Leadership. He's entrusted with it. Now, at that same time, when the Decepticons retreat, a little civil war within their group breaks out because they're all on Astro Train, headed back to Cybertron. And one of the things I'll never understand about the Transformers is how they all changed size. So there must have been a way, and this was never explained, for when they changed size. There must have been a way for them all to get bigger because all of the Decepticons fit on Astro Train. And which kind of doesn't make sense because at one point they're all the same size, but they all loaded onto him. So you have all these robots loaded onto this space shuttle. Anyway, so Astro Train says jettison some weight or we'll never make it to Cybertron. So Starscream says, okay, Astro Train has requested that we lighten our burden. Someone else says, in that case, I say it's survival of the fittest. So basically all of the Decepticons that were maimed and wounded during the battle are tossed into space. And Starscream seizes the moment and tosses Megatron out of the ship. And he says, Megatron says, hey, I still function. Starscream says, you want to bet? And he throws him out. So he betrays Megatron for what we think is the last time. And then one of the funny exchanges in the movie, a little squabble breaks out between all of them because they're all vying for power at this point. And Starscream says, well, as Megatron has, how shall I say, basically left, I nominate myself as the new leader. The Constructicons say, well, wait a minute, we formed Devastator, the strongest of all. We should rule. Then Soundwave comes and says, wait, Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior. And then one of the Constructicons says, well, who would follow a charismatic bore like you? And then Soundwave ejects his crew, and Rumble says, hey, no one calls Soundwave uncharismatic, and so this whole fight ensues amongst the Decepticons, and they go back. But then something interesting happens. Megatron and the remaining of those wounded Decepticons floating in space, they come upon Unicron, and Unicron, I guess, sees all and knows all. And he saw Optimus Prime die. He saw the Matrix of Leadership get passed to Ultra Magnus. And he basically calls to Megatron as Megatron and his cronies are drifting towards oblivion. He says, hey, I'll give you new bodies. But what I need you to do is I need you to kill Ultra Magnus and destroy the Autobot Matrix of Leadership. So Megatron agrees, to do this. Otherwise, he's going to be gobbled up by Unicron. And Megatron and the Insecticons and those other guys who are Forsaken are transformed into Galvatron and Scourge and the Sweeps. And so we've just said goodbye to two other characters, to a whole set of characters, once again, that we were seeing after school every day. And we're introduced to these new ones. And it's funny because just before the movie was released, Hasbro did start releasing this second batch of characters. And I remember seeing the Sharkticons and seeing Galvatron and seeing Hot Rod and Rodimus Prime and saying, what are these guys? How do these guys factor into what we've been seeing up to this time? So now we have these new bad guys, Unicron 6, Galvatron, and those guys onto Ultra Magnus and the new gang, who are trying to figure out what to do because Unicron has attacked Moonbase 1, he's attacked Moonbase 2, so now they have to figure out how to fight this evil and defeat it somehow. So now we're into Act 2. And Act 2 basically involves this new group of Autobots leaving Earth to try to defeat Unicron somehow. And this is where, kind of similar to The Lord of the Rings, the initial party splits. So they're on two different spaceships because Galvatron and his group attacked them, and Cup and Hot Rod split off onto one ship with the Dinobots, and then Ultra Magnus and Perceptor and Springer and RC and Daniel, they split off onto another ship, and they get attacked in space en route, which gives rise to another funny scene, in my opinion, which is where Cup tells stories throughout the movie. That's part of his contribution. He's the old, wise sage. And the Dinobots are gathered around him in this particular scene. And he's talking about Autobot wipers and the dust was really thick. And Grimlock says, me, Grimlock, I don't want to hear about wipers, want to hear about good part of story. And meanwhile, Hot Rod is fighting this other droid, and he says, hey, maybe we should, instead of listening to these old stories, maybe we should be figuring out how to save our friends and save Cybertron. And then the Dinobots say, no, we want to hear the story. And that's when they get attacked. Cup and Hot Rod, their ship gets damaged, and they land on the planet of the Quintessons. And then the second group, with involving Ultra Magnus and Springer and RC, they get attacked by Galvatron and Cyclonus, and they sacrifice part of their ship, and they land on the planet of Junk. Hot Rod, we pick up when we pick up with Hot Rod. Hot Rod is in an ocean with other robotic creatures, and he's separated from the Dinobots and Cup, and he's tangled up in some sort of sea plant life, and so he cuts his way out, and these little piranhas are trying to eat at him, and he can hear Cup calling to him. He releases himself, goes to find Cup, battling for his life against some sort of robotic squid. He defeats the squid, rescues Cup, and carries his pieces out to shore, and he puts them back together. On the other planet, on the planet of Junk, the other group crash lands on the planet of Junk. They're looking for spare parts, and then we see that there's another species of Transformers living on the planet of Junk, which turns out to be the Junkions. Oh boy, Abdul Gaines is in here. I'm gonna read a comment. Abdul Gaines says, the toy line really took a left turn upon this movie coming out. Even to this day, I wonder what would have happened if Prime survived naturally. Okay, I'm going to come back to what happened after the movie was released. Okay, so we find out on the planet of Junk, there's this other species. Meanwhile, over on on Quintessa, what we find out is that when once again we get the sage interaction with the young protagonist, Hot Rod puts Cup back together, and Cup is moving his head and his legs, and he's saying, you left the part out, and Cup and Hot Rod says, no, you're just a little stiff, and Cup says, well, all in all, you did a good job. You got rid of a nasty bar in my rotator. So they transform. They say, hey, let's go find the Dinobots and get off this crazy looking planet. So they drive a little bit, and they run into the Sharktacons. And Sharktacons are another species of robot. They transform into these terrestrial shark-like creatures. A funny exchange there is the universal greeting. Cup says, hold on, wait a minute, tells Hot Rod. I will use the universal greeting. And Hot Rod says, the universal greeting? He said, yeah, it works all the time. So he pulls out an energy goodie, and he recites the universal greeting, Bow, Weep, Grana, Weep, Ninibon. The Sharkticons look at themselves and they say, Bow, Weep, Grana, Weep, Ninibon. And they start taking the energy goodies and eating them up. And Hot Rod says, this is getting expensive. And they run out. And the Sharkticons, when they run out, they take them to see their masters, the Quintessons. And the Quintessons, give me a second here. Well, I had a picture of the Quintessons in here somewhere. Oh, here we go. And the Quintessons turn out to be ANC worker. And so the Quintessons, and I'm almost done with this commentary because we're almost at the end of the movie. It's not a long movie. The Quintessons end up being this race of crooked, okay, a lot of parallels to today, but I don't want YouTube to take this down. But the Quintessons end up being this race of crooked court officials, these crooked judges, and they're all these they have these personalities that are all, you know, sitting on this. They're sharing this pod, and all the faces basically rotate around. And it seems like any intruder that visits or unfortunately gets stuck on Quintessa, they go before the Quintessons for judgment. And if they rule you guilty, which they normally do, you drop into the pit of Sharkticons at your demise. And so Cup and Hot Rod, they're thrown into jail, and they watch one of the survivors of the planet Lithon get killed by the Sharkticons. And then there's another survivor in the neighboring cell who tells them who and what Unicron is, and that Unicron is coming to get everybody. And at that point, that survivor gets taken out, screaming, I'm the last survivor of the planet Lithon. And Hot Rod and Cup watches this guy is destroyed and devoured by the Sharkticons. Now, over on the other planet, the planet of Junk, Galvatron, as they're repairing their ship, Galvatron, Cyclonus, and the Sweeps, they find Ultra Magnus, Ultra Magnus, RC, and Springer, and those guys repairing their ship, and they attack them. Galvatron eventually corners Ultra Magnus, Galvatron and Cyclonus, and he says, give me the Matrix. Ultra Magnus says no. He tries to open it, but somehow Ultra Magnus cannot open the Matrix of Leadership. It's not the darkest hour. And we see that Ultra Magnus is not the chosen one to open the Matrix of Leadership. And so the Sweeps gun him down, and Galvatron comes into ownership of the Matrix of Leadership, the Autobot Matrix of Leadership. And he threatens, okay, Unicron, I have this now. I will now make you my slave. So then we go back to, the movie takes us back to Quintessa, and now Hot Rod and Cup are on trial. And no matter what you tell the Quintessons, they usually rule that you're guilty. And their little bailiff turns to Hot Rod and Cup and says, you know, it sometimes helps, but not often, if you beg for your life. And Hot Rod and Cup are whispering amongst themselves, I can't transform, keep trying. And the little bailiff says, silence or you'll be held in contempt of this court. And then one of my favorite lines, Hot Rod says, I have nothing but contempt for this court. The bailiff turns to the Quintesson, says, guilty or innocent. The head turns, boom, innocent. Feed him to the Sharkticons. I believe they say innocent. And then Cup and Hot Rod drop into the Sharkticon pit. And Hot Rod says, you know, they've got more Sharkticons than we have photon charges. And Cup says, well, then let's have a demolition derby. So they transform. And somehow, this is one of those liberties that movies take. Somehow, they're able to transform into their vehicles, and they're able to attach to the wall. It's really cool to watch. And they're able to drive around really, really fast and create this vortex out of which they shoot out onto the surface. And they're able to, you know, hold a demolition derby with the Sharkticons. And beat down the Sharkticons and stave off their own death for just a little bit, but eventually they start getting overwhelmed And then the little bailiff, yells out, "Execute them! What are you guys doing?" And then at that point, the door falls down, and then comes in. Hold on a second. Wait for it. Wait for it. Geez, I know it's here. Wait for it. Give me a second. Because I know it's here. Hold on. They say the best laid plans of mice and men most often go astray. Oh, here it is. Give me 1 second here. I hope everyone's having a fun Sunday. I know Abdul Gaines is coming in and out watching football. Okay. Sometimes when you're in your computer and you're looking for things, it's staring you right in the face, but you can't see it. So the bailiff yells out, "Execute them." And then the door falls on him, and in comes the Dinobots. The Dinobots made a new friend called Wheelie, and Grimlock is able to intimidate all of the Sharkticons, and he demands that they attack the Quintessons. So that's how Hot Rod and Cup escaped this challenge. And it turns out that Wheelie has his own ship. And what's funny about this movie is that they really used the Dinobots as comic relief. Oftentimes in movies and in stories, there are characters that are set aside and designated for comic relief. And in this movie, they used the Dinobots for comic relief. I don't know who's coming to watch this. I see some guys in the chat that I recognize. If you're new to the stream and are watching it on the playback, please like this stream, this video. Please share it. Please subscribe. If you want to donate to my Cash App should be below this video. I think I put it down there. If I haven't, then I will. But I expect to do more of these. And this is the first one of its kind. So over on the planet of junk, Ultra Magnus has been blown to bits. The Matrix has been stolen by Galvatron, and RC and Springer and Blur and Daniel, they're wondering what they're going to do. At that point, the Junkions emerge and reveal themselves, and they attack Springer, RC, Blur, and Daniel. So that fight goes on. You get a song by Weird Al Yankovic, "Dare to Be Stupid." The Junkions, you can beat them up, you can knock their arms off, knock their heads off, but they're able to put themselves back together. Also, they talk TV. As we find out, that little sequence ends with a battle between Wreck-Gar, who's the leader of the Junkions, and Springer. Springer's fighting for his life. He has a sword. He's one of the rare Autobots who has a sword instead of a blaster. Wreck-Gar has an axe. And then at that point, Wreck-Gar's attacking Springer, breaks his sword, and then Daniel knocks out Wreck-Gar with a piece of scrap. And that's when they look up to the sky and they see this weird-looking ship descending. It turns out to be Hot Rod, Cup, and the Dinobots, and Wheelie. Hot Rod remembers the universal greeting, which didn't work on Quintessa. He pulls out one more energy goodie and recites the universal greeting, "Ba Weep Grana Weep Niniban," gives it to Wreck-Gar. And it turns out Wreck-Gar is a more intelligent being than the Sharkticons, and he recognizes the universal greeting. He takes the little glowing energy goodie, shows it to the rest of the Junkions, and they basically, they become allies at that point. They're experts in repairing things, so they repair Ultra Magnus. And Ultra Magnus tells them that the Matrix is gone. Galvatron took it. All hope is lost. But at that point, Hot Rod starts to step up into a leadership capacity and says, well, we're going to go find it. If it's at Unicron, we have to go to Unicron. So the Junkions have a ship. Hot Rod, they have a ship from that they got from Wheelie. So at that point, they take off towards Unicron for the third act. The third act, we find out something that we should have known all along, with this being the Transformers. Galvatron goes back to Unicron and says, okay, you've had the upper hand at this point. I've been your slave, but now I have the matrix of leadership and I'm going to make you my slave. So Galvatron sits there on Unicron trying to open up the matrix of leadership with no luck at all. And Unicron says, okay, dumbass, I gave you a second life. I showed you mercy. I gave you one little job and you betray me. Okay, well, now let me show you this. And what we should have known was that Unicron was a transformer himself. So Unicron transforms into this big humanoid thing. And he tells Galvatron, for a time, I considered sparing your wretched little planet Cybertron, but now you will witness its dismemberment. So in the third act, Unicron transforms himself and attacks Cybertron, and we see Shockwave scrambling all the Decepticon forces. And that's the start of our third battle. The Autobots and their two ships, they approach Unicron, and they're kind of stunned. And they're kind of like, wow, I can't believe this. And Hot Rod says to Cup, have you ever seen anything like this? And Cup says, nope. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime. So with that, they attack Unicron. A song by Dare by Spectre General starts. And they attack Unicron. The ship with Hot Rod on it, they fly right into Unicron's eye. So now they're inside Unicron's body. Hot Rod gets separated from the group, which is what you would normally expect to see in a movie like this, where you're going to have a main protagonist who might emerge to be the savior at the end. And the rest of the group, they fall somewhere within Unicron. It turns out Unicron, I'm a scientist, so Unicron has his own immune system. So with foreign bodies in there, his own immune system starts attacking Cup and Springer and RC and Daniel. Daniel finds his father, Spike, and Jazz, and Cliffjumper, and Bumblebee. It turns out Unicron has his own digestive tract because they're being brought in on some we'll call it a conveyor belt. Anything Unicron digests, they're being brought in on this conveyor belt and dropped into this vat of acid. So Daniel uses his exosuit to drop the door down so Spike and the rest of them fall and they avoid death. Outside of Unicron, the Dinobots are fighting Unicron, and then the Junkion's ship, Unicron traps them in his hand, crushes it, and throws it. And we go back to Hot Rod. He found Galvatron within Unicron, because what Unicron did when Galvatron betrayed him was he dropped him inside of his mouth, and so Galvatron was somewhere inside of Unicron. So Hot Rod comes to, and he sees the Matrix glowing, and it's resting on Galvatron's neck, and he says, the Matrix, and Galvatron says, it'll do you no good, Autobot. It can't be opened. And Hot Rod says, not by a Decepticon. And Unicron senses that, early on in the movie, we see that Unicron senses that Hot Rod is the one. And then at that point, Galvatron orders, in this telepathic way that he's been communicating with Galvatron, Unicron orders Galvatron to destroy him now, because he realizes this is the one that can open the matrix of leadership and destroy me. And so Galvatron tries to hunt down Hot Rod. And we get to a scene where kind of reminiscent of The Empire Strikes Back, or maybe Return of the Jedi, where Darth Vader is looking for Luke Skywalker or maybe in the Empire Strikes Back, something similar. Galvatron says, "Come on out, puny Autobot. You can't run forever. Ultra Magnus had more courage than you," or something like that. And then, this final battle, this final struggle breaks out between Hot Rod and Galvatron. The line says, "Come on out, puny Autobot. We all have to die sometime." And then Hot Rod says, "Not today, Galvatron." He punches him, transforms, and runs and tries to run Galvatron over. And then he transforms back into his humanoid form, and then Galvatron ends up choking Hot Rod. And then when we come back, Galvatron's going on and self-aggrandizing and pontificating about, puny Autobot. I killed Ultra Magnus. It's a pleasure killing Autobots. I killed Ultra Magnus, and I'm going to kill you. And then at that point, we have our hero moment. The music starts playing, "The Touch" by Stan Bush. The Matrix starts glowing, and then Hot Rod grabs its handles and then rips it off of Galvatron's neck. The chains break, and then Hot Rod stands up, starts clutching them. He's clutching the Matrix. He's able to put his 2 fingers in each side. Galvatron sees it, and he realizes, oh no, this is, this is the moment. This is the turning point. You hear Optimus Prime's voice speak to him, kind of like the way Obi-Wan Kenobi would speak to Luke. He says, "Rise, Rodimus Prime." Hot Rod whispers, "Optimus," like you can hear Optimus's voice. And then you see Hot Rod opening the Matrix and growing in stature, and he turns into Rodimus Prime. Now, there were 2 separate toys for Hot Rod and Rodimus Prime, but you could look at the colors and tell that it was the same being. And you could tell also, this is how observant I am. My brother's the same way. You could see that if you look at the faces in the cartoon in this movie, the face of Hot Rod looks slightly different than Rodimus Prime. Rodimus Prime, his face has more lines in it, which I think signify an older, more experienced being, which is what you want from your leader. So Hot Rod, Rodimus Prime looks at Galvatron and says, "This is the end of the road, Galvatron." He throws him outside of Unicron, and Galvatron goes tumbling out into space. And then Hot Rod goes ahead and further opens up the Matrix of Leadership. And those blue things in there, they radiate everywhere. And then Unicron gradually starts to explode from within and starts to collapse. And then the good guys have to escape. Hot Rod catches up with the group, tells them Optimus Prime's classic line, "Autobots transform and roll out." I see my brother Amal is still here. Thank you for being here, bro. He quotes the classic line, "Autobots transform and roll out." Hot Rod's Cup says, "I knew you had it in you, lad." And then they all drive off. They crash out of Unicron's other eye, somehow land on Cybertron, and then the camera goes to Unicron once again, further imploding. Everything blows up except for his head, which ends up orbiting Cybertron. And then we go back to, and I shouldn't say this, but ironically, we're kind of experiencing this now with the election. I shouldn't say that, but final scene, Cybertron is in tatters after all this battling, but the Autobots have retaken it, and Rodimus Prime is giving them a speech about this. Let this mark the end of the Cybertronian wars, and let this move us on to a period of peace and tranquility. And then he raises his fist and yells, "Till all are one." And then they're yelling out, the rest of the group is yelling out, "Till all are one, till all are one." And that's something that Optimus Prime stated at the beginning, I believe, when he handed the Matrix of Leadership over to Ultra Magnus. And that's how the movie ends. The Touch is still playing. I had that record, by the way. I have that record on my iTunes. I still love that soundtrack. And then it fades into the Transformers theme by Lion. That's a really cool rendition of the song. And then we see Unicron's head circling the planet for the end of the movie. And that's the end of the movie. And so I remember me, my brother, my father, we left the movie theater. And as a kid, I loved it. I wasn't sure what I had just seen, because again, a lot of the characters that some of the toys that I had, some of the characters that I had developed an emotional attachment to were either not mentioned in the movie or got killed. Speaking of getting killed, one memorable line from the movie, I remember in the theater, my dad, when Optimus Prime died, my dad said, Optimus Prime just lost his color. So Optimus Prime, when he died, he turned black and white. Again, we never seen that before, but I remember my dad saying that. Oh, he lost his color. And those are my memories. That's a walkthrough of what happened. But going away at that time, again, a lot of the characters that I knew and loved got killed off. Some of them weren't even mentioned. There was no mention of the aerial bots or the Protectobots or any of the other characters that had come along as the TV series evolved. Many of them got the original cast got killed off, like Wheeljack and Prowl and Ratchet and Ironhide, and many of the bad guys we knew got killed off, but there were some that were just never mentioned again. Now, after the movie, and I'm going to drop the link in the chat if anyone, I have a few viewers here. If you want to come in and say your feedback on the movie or just jogs your memory, if you want to say something, you're welcome to come in. I'm going to put the live action Hot Rod back up, the GIF. Yeah. After the movie, they continued the series a little bit, but it was different. They moved it from Earth. The series was basically, the series basically at that time took place on Earth. We had gone to Cybertron a couple of times. I'm thinking particularly of when the aerial bots and the Stunticons were created. Starscream's brigade, at the end of that episode, they were exiled into outer space. So we'd gone to space in the series before. The link is right there in the chat if anyone wants to come in and, give their 2 cents or give their thoughts on the movie or anything I mentioned here. But after that, it was different. It wasn't based on Earth. It was kind of based in Cybertron, I believe. And just the characters were different. Now instead of Optimus Prime in charge, it was now Rodimus Prime who was in charge. And many of the characters that we had seen were gone. So I don't really remember hearing about the aerial bots after that so much, or the Stunticons. We got the Technobots. We got the Technobots. We got the Terrorcons. We got a lot of other things. But that original crew, that original cast of characters was gone. They did eventually bring Optimus Prime back. I do remember that. I do remember there was some plague that was raging through the universe. And they did find a way to bring Optimus Prime back. And actually, Starscream actually came back from the dead as well. But it just, in a way, it just wasn't the same. The link right there, the link is right there in the chat if anyone wants to come in. You just click on it. If you're new to StreamYard, it'll bring you right into the backstage and I can see you. You don't have to turn your camera on. You can just, let your voice be heard. But so there was a change in the series, but there was also a personal change as well. I, at that time, if we're talking 1986, 1987, at that time, I personally was progressing into middle school. and either adolescence or puberty. I can never tell the difference between adolescence and puberty. I had one ex-girlfriend tell me that it was puberty, but let's just say middle school. And for me, at that time, there was a gradual putting down of the toys and those more fanboyish things for girls. There was more thought about girls at that time. And for me, basketball. So I just by nature stopped. I'm not saying that I didn't still like it, but I think my interests just kind of went somewhere else at that time. They shifted to other places. And so I stopped watching as much. And then I think shortly thereafter that this whole thing in this iteration of it kind of died down a little bit. And I think it eventually went away. I know that there was a follow-up series where they used a different kind of animation for the Transformers characters. And of course, they brought it to the big screen using real life actors with Shia LaBeouf. It's a French name, I don't know. Megan Fox, and then eventually, I think Mark Wahlberg was in one of them, and Tyrese Gibson was in one of them, or a series of them, and was it Paul? It's not Paul Sorvino, the guy who played Vito in Do the Right Thing. He was in it, and they tried to use CGI for the actual Transformers, and Peter Cullen did voice Optimus Prime in those movies. But to me, and those were entertaining. I think I didn't watch all of them. I think Dark Side of the Moon was my favorite. I really enjoyed the idea that Cybertron might be brought through this wormhole and replacing Earth in its orbit. I thought that was kind of eerie. But to me, nothing will ever be the same as that 4-year stretch in the early to the mid 80s, culminating with this movie. And I think, let me look at my notes here. I think that's all I've got for this. It very much followed traditional storytelling. It wasn't a long movie. It was only 85 minutes. I was watching it on Friday night again in preparation to this. It was late and I was getting tired, but I told myself, you know what? It's not much longer. I can hang on and finish out the movie, and it did finish up pretty quickly. But I thought it very much followed traditional storytelling. There were 3 main acts. You had a protagonist. You had an ominous evil closing in on everybody, which I'll just keep it vague in terms of what's happening in our real world. You wonder sometimes if there's some ominous evil, while we're all fighting amongst each other, if there's some ominous evil closing in on us. But you see that principle in other movies and series as well, where you have 2 groups fighting while something else is closing in on them unbeknownst to them until potentially the last hour. Another funny story about this, and if no one wants to come up, I'll close out because I've been talking a lot. And my poor computer might need a little rest at some point, and I should go outside at some point. But my first year of college was at the SUNY College at Brockport, which is a state school in between the cities of Buffalo and Rochester. Rochester is what I would consider our sister city. And I went to SUNY Brockport for 1 year before transferring to my HBCU. And this was before DVD technology, though, China and Japan might have been using it at that time. But we were still using VHS at that point. Now, coincidentally, I just realized this today. November 8th is my late grandmother, Lena McKinney. It's her birthday, November 8th. And That VHS copy of the Transformers movie, she got it for me. I saw it in a catalog, and I remember she came home from work one day, and I said, I want, yeah, can you get this for me? I don't know why I asked her for it that particular day, but she said, all right, this is either gonna be your birthday gift or your Christmas gift. Don't ask me for anything else after I get this for you. And so she got it for me, and I took that VHS copy to SUNY Brockport with me, and I had it. And there was a chubby kid named Phil. I don't know which upstate New York town Phil was from, but Phil knew that I had it. And Phil kept telling me, that's a collector's item. I'll buy that off you. Will you sell it to me? And he asked me over and over and over again, will you sell me your copy of the Transformers movie, your VHS copy? And I kept telling him, yeah, man, I'll think about it. In my mind, knowing, hell no, I'm not selling you this. This is, my grandmother got this for me, but yeah, it's a collector's item. This movie has a special significance for me. So I never sold it to him. And that VHS, I think in the course of moving around, and I think I left a bunch of my belongings at my mother's house, which often happens when you're moving around. Your parents' house becomes the storage spot. And there were some changes in my mother's life, and some items got lost in the process. So that got lost, but it's okay because we don't watch VHS today anyway. We're using DVD and Blu-ray. But that's my other funny story from this movie. So I'm going to stop unless someone wants to come up. I appreciate those of you who hung on and humored me throughout this. This is something the Critical Drinker does. He usually has a wingman and a co-pilot when they review movies like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan or Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, and they go for hours and hours and hours. I mean, because they go scene by scene. I can't imagine the preparation it takes to do that. But this has been done on other channels, and I may do more of this here as I'm thinking about the opportunities for content going forward. Thank you all. If you're watching this on the playback, if you hung around this long, which again, the Critical Drinker, they go on for 5 and 6 hours doing it. So this technically isn't long, but some people only have an attention span and a patience for things like this. If you've watched on the playback, please give this a like. Please subscribe. Please share, and please let me know if you have any comments about this movie in the comments section below. I'm trying to think if I've forgotten a part of my sales pitch here. I don't think so. Anyhow, I'm going to stop this here. Hey, so all are one. Always remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I will talk to you the next time. All right. Bye-bye.